Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar on the Ci7000 series of benchtop spectrophotometers. Presenting today is Tim Mouw, our Applications Engineering and Technical Support Manager at X-Rite Pantone. I'm Robert Grotans, the Global Technical Marketing Manager, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Just a few things to go over before we get started today. Due to the number of people that are attending today's webinar, we will keep everyone muted. If you have any questions, please use the questions function on the GoToWebinar panel. We will have time to answer a few of your questions at the end. Finally, this webinar will be recorded and you'll receive a link so that you can review the webinar at your convenience. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim to get things started.
Welcome, and I look forward to having this brief time with you just to talk about our benchtop instruments. So let's go ahead and dive into that. We're going to begin by talking about kind of our agenda for the day, about what really matters. What really matters when it comes to the measurement device that we're using. And I've boiled it down to 3 points that we'll be covering today. Data compatibility and the accuracy of the data that we're generating. Secondly, how about measuring a non-traditional sample? When I say non-traditional, I'm talking about, it's easy to measure a square, flat substance, but what if it's not that? How do I go about doing that? And then the third thing we're going to talk about is an audit trail. How can I ensure that I know how a sample was measured so that I can replicate that throughout my workflow. So we'll be looking at those 3 things. As we talk about data accuracy and compatibility, we're going to take a quick look at a couple of legacy instruments. So those of you who have used X-Rite instruments in the past, 30 plus years of benchtop instruments, you may have had a Color Ci7000A, or a Color i7. I put those up there just as kind of a reference point to look as something familiar. You might go, yep, that's what we're using, or that's what we did use. And then we're going to compare to that and talk about the new devices. And so we're talking about a Ci7000 series is what we say. The kind of flagship instrument is the Ci7800, but it's a family of instruments, and we'll get deeper into their differences shortly. There's a Ci7600, there's a Ci7500, which you can see immediately looks different in the center area there. It doesn't have that gray piece on the middle. We'll talk about why, because it's a reflectance only device. And then the Ci7860. So we're going to talk about the differences in accuracy and data coming from those devices. One quick point, sometimes people think that this is insignificant, but from a user perspective, it can be very significant. These devices have this area right here that is a drawer. And I show a picture of that simply because from a user's perspective, having everything at your fingertips when you need to use your device is really, really a user-friendly experience. And that drawer, as you can see, is housing all of the aperture plates, all of the calibration media, the black trap, the white calibration tile, the green check tile, the UV calibration tile. Everything is in a drawer inside the device. So you don't have to worry about it got left in a case that got misplaced somewhere or whatever. So just point that out. So let's look at some specifications of these devices, and then we're going to overlay, after we go through these, how the older instruments compare to them. So first, in measurement modes and specular modes, and you'll see as we go through this across the top, we have the 4 different devices, and then we list for each of them how they meet these various things. And I've highlighted in green anytime we go from left to right where something has changed. So for example, the 7500 is a reflectance only instrument. That's why it looked different. It doesn't have an opening to do transmission. It's for reflectance only. But the other 3, the 7600, 7800, 7860, all do transmission. All of them do simultaneous specular included and specular excluded. Those are really important, and if you are someone who needs to do both, that's a critical thing. Okay, aperture sizes. You can see that the 7500 has two, 25 and 10 millimeter. With the 7600, we add a 6 millimeter, and then for the 78 and the 7860, we go add in another two more apertures, 17 and down to 3.5 millimeter. The range and resolution. So the first two instruments are a range of 360 to 750 nanometers with a 10 nanometer resolution by default, can also be 20 nanometer. The two higher end, as on the right hand side, go into a higher range up to 780 nanometers and can go down to a 5 nanometer resolution. Now, depending on what you're measuring and your requirements, you may need those kinds of things. Cutoff filters, which are used for UV measurements and UV calibration. And see what's available. The short-term repeatability, this is how you test an instrument repeatably measuring the same thing. You can see on the right-hand side, those two devices, the higher-end devices, if you will, go down to a 0.01 versus a 0.03 for the two on the left. And then finally, maybe one that's focused on a lot is inter-instrument agreement. Inter-instrument agreement means if I have two devices of the same model, how close will they agree with one another based on measuring something similar to BCRA tiles and calculating their color difference. And you can see that the 7500 and 7600 are at 0.15 average delta E. The 7800 is 0.08, which equals the best that had always been traditionally available on the previous instruments and from competitive devices. And the 7860, the thing that it stands out for is that inter-instrument agreement down to 0.06. Now, initially, the difference from 0.08 to 0.06 might not seem significant, but if you're producing something, and we have customers in this situation where your tolerance is 0.25 or 0.3 delta E, the less of that tolerance that you consume with the variation between instruments, the better. So 0.06 makes a big difference in that case. So then let's take a look, excuse me, at how the 7000A and the Color i7 compare to these. And I'm going to just lay an orange thing over the top. So those two instruments do reflectance and transmission as well, but they don't do simultaneous specular included and specular excluded. So what that means, if I was using a 7000A, for example, and I need to measure both modes, I have to calibrate two different methods, and I literally have to measure my sample twice. So if I need to do that on a regular basis, that's a lot of extra time and work. Where with all of these instruments, the newer ones, it's simultaneous. It's calibrated for both. A single measurement captures both sets of data. That's a huge time save. The aperture sizes for those previous instruments is the same as the 7800. Their range, however, and their resolution is in that lower section, 360 to 750. And the resolution to a maximum, or minimum, I should say, of 10 nanometers, where now we can go to 5 nanometers in the 7800 and the 7860. Those devices had a single cutoff filter. Again, needing different cutoff filters, what they do is they're cutting off the UV light below 400 or 420 or 460 nanometers. The reason you might need those is for some very specific optical brightening agents. Fluorescent substances may require that you use that. Short-term repeatability for those instruments was 0.01, and their inter-instrument agreement was 0.08. So you can see the differences there. There are others as well that we'll talk more about as we keep going here. So how about if I'm measuring some non-traditional things? Let's take a look at that. In reflectance, so we've got the ability, we're going to show you a series of accessories and things that can be used with these devices to do some different kinds of measurements. This is a test tube holder. It connects to the front of the device, the arm stays down, and you slide a test tube in there. Now you can measure something in a test tube. Or a cuvette. In this one, you can see there's a cuvette, which is essentially like a rectangular test tube, right? For measuring a liquid substance in that cuvette. We have a preform holder. We have many customers are using this because preforms, which ultimately get blow molded into a 2-liter soda bottle or something similar, we've got a device to hold that in place and get repeatable readings. And even what's called a compression holder. It's kind of a complicated thing, but essentially it's used for either measuring fibers, which would go into this little cell, or you can also use it to measure carpet, where you actually put the piece of carpet up against the device. And what this compression arm does is controls how much pressure is pushing against the fibers of the carpet when the measurement takes place. If you think about carpet, if you push harder or softer on it, you're going to bend it differently, and it's going to cause the color to shift. So it's really important to have consistent pressure when you're taking a measurement. So we have a device made to help control that. All right, that's an example of some reflectance ones. For transmission measurements, we have a transmission kit. We'll show you what that looks like here in just a second in a couple of different uses. So that transmission kit can be used to hold film or something that clear kind of plastic that we want to measure, or transparent kind of plastic. That can also hold a cuvette like this. And so now you can see this transmission kit. It's very nice because it's magnetically connected into a few pins. And so you literally set it in place, it locks in place. Now I've got a cuvette in place to be able to have measurements of some liquids. And we even have something called a flow-through cell holder. So this is like a cuvette, but you can see there's 2 arms coming off of that where hoses could be connected, and I could literally be passing a fluid through that cell and testing it, measuring it, pump more fluid through and test again. So it's for continuous kind of monitoring or measurements, series of measurements on liquids. Then we get some very non-traditional. There's feet that screw into the back of the instrument, so you can actually set the instrument vertical. Why would you do that? You may have a situation where you're going to put something in a petri dish, for example, and you want to be able to set it on top of the device to take a measurement through the bottom of the dish. And we have customers doing that. We can reverse that 180 degrees, and we have what's called a port down stand, where it literally holds the instrument in the air. And then you have this piston here that kind of holds the sample up toward the instrument. Could be the same petri dish, but now I want to measure not through the glass, but down directly onto the substance without actually making contact with the device. And this dust filter kit, and I mention this for this reason. There are some situations where you may be in an extremely dusty environment based on what it is that you're producing. And we all know that dust and electronics don't agree with each other. Electronics are like a magnet for dust. And so the dust can get inside the device and cause issues. It can cause the lamp to start to misbehave and so forth. This filter kit and this wrap that goes around the instrument stops that contamination from happening. Doesn't stop it 100% completely, but it slows it down greatly, so that you're talking about maybe once a year you have to have the instrument cleaned, rather than in a very dusty environment. We've seen instruments fail in a matter of weeks. And so this does a very, very good job of allowing you to take those measurements. So we've talked about the kind of data that comes out of the device. We talked about the kinds of things we're going to measure. Lastly, let's talk for a moment about an audit trail. And when we're talking about an audit trail, we're talking about coupling the device with either Color IQC or Color iMatch software, and then we can have a complete audit trail. Why does that matter? Because if you don't know how a measurement was taken, you're susceptible to there being variation in how it was taken, and that be leading to wrong color information. For example, when we take a measurement, this is a measurement I called trial 1. It was being compared to my standard that I called pad. My initials and this unique ID. Our software literally will create a unique ID for every measurement ever taken. So no one on the planet will ever take a measurement and get the same unique ID that I did. So we're able to do that so that I can have an absolute certainty that this measurement is the unique one that I took. It's not going to be duplicated by someone else. I also can go and look at this data condition tab about my sample, my measurement, and see what kind of spectral was it. Oh, it was reflectance, or was it transmittance? What kind of specular component did I use? Was I filtering any of the UV energy? Which port size was used? Here, what sensor model? Ci7X, meaning it was a 7000, 7800, 7860, whatever. The sensor serial, even the serial number of the device. What wavelengths I was using. My spectral data. Even down here to the point where it records the temperature and the percent humidity. Now, those are being recorded not of the surface of the sample, but that's being recorded inside that drawer I talked about earlier in the device. So we have a sensor inside there, helps us know what temperature your calibration media is at to ensure very accurate calibration. But we also record it at every measurement. So it was taken at 30 degrees C and 20.2% relative humidity. So just knowing that, maybe I see, oh, you're getting a different result than I am, but your temperature says 30 and mine says 20. That might give us a clue as to why. And then lastly is this image thing. Our software, our instruments have a camera inside of them. You can turn on this image so you can see what you're going to be measuring as you're positioning it against the instrument, and we capture the image. We can set it to capture every single image. And in this case, I might notice, wow, I measured this yellow color, but I can see that there's some discoloration or a flaw in the top of that sample. If I can see that, and you took a measurement of the same product, but you didn't happen to measure where that little flaw was, we might understand why we see different results between you and I. So that gives us the ability to really have a complete audit trail of the measurement to know everything we can to help us understand, okay, if we're getting a difference between my measurement and yours, did we do everything the same way? If not, we can correct that. If we did, then maybe we've got some actual color issue going on with our product. So the considerations are the accuracy and repeatability of your measurements, because they can be critical to maintaining your reputation, right? If your results don't agree with your customer or your vendor's results, that can be damaging, and we want you to have accurate, repeatable measurements. Measuring a wide variety of objects can be achieved with various accessories, allowing you to measure almost anything. We won't say anything because I'm sure we'll get examples of things we can't. But we do have flexibility to measure those wide variety of things. And lastly, an audit trail of your measurements can be essential to ensuring that you are in control of your color and you're not dealing with some kind of measurement variation being interpreted as an off-color issue with your product. So those are our points for today. At this point, we're going to spend some time answering questions, but I think Robert has another poll for us first.
Yes. Yep. Thank you, Tim. I see a few questions already coming in. If you have a question that you'd like to submit, feel free to do so now. While Tim filters through those questions, I am going to display a poll here. If you are interested in talking to a salesperson or someone at X-Rite, feel free to answer this poll.
All right, so while you're looking at that, let me grab a couple of the questions here. So one of them was somebody asked, why do I need a UV calibration tile? So our instruments, all instruments, in fact, all light sources have varying amounts of ultraviolet light inside of them. That's light that's below 400 nanometers. And if you're measuring something like a fabric sample or a paper sample that has an optical brightening agent in it, those things are taking light from below 400 nanometers and converting them to light above 400 nanometers. Hence, they brighten optically something. If you want to measure that, typically you're using a whiteness, CIE whiteness calculation. And so in order to make sure that if I take a measurement and you take a measurement that we agree, we provide you with a UV calibrated plaque, a kind of plastic that has a known whiteness value on it. Put that on the device, and the device has an auto calibration routine where it will insert the filter. Let's say it measures it with no filter in place, and I find out my value is too high, and then it puts the filter in 50% and my value is too low, and then it'll slowly go through and step the filter till it filters the UV content of my light so that I get the same whiteness value as the plaque. The reason that you need to do that is that over time, the amount of UV in your lamp, in your device, will change. And so you calibrate that to calibrate how much filtering is necessary to maintain a consistent amount of UV coming to your samples, okay? Another question we had, someone said, I have a color i5. Would that have the same capabilities as the color i7? So yes and no. So a color i5 would be like having a Ci7000. If we go back, we can actually jump back there, maybe. Let me see if I can do that. I'm going to jump back to this slide right there. So a Ci5 would fall in line with the Ci7600, right? Still, it's reflectance and transmission. It's a lesser number of apertures. It's still there with the range and resolution. And most importantly, its inter-instrument agreement is the 0.15. So a Ci7600, Ci7800, it's like the 7800 being a little bit higher end and the 7600 being a little lower end. The same is true of a Ci5 and a Ci7. All right, let's take one more look here. So someone says, CI7 values were not matching CE7000A. Okay? So the CI7, older instrument, and the 7000A had a lower level of agreement with one another, admittedly, than what we have with the 7800. The CI7800, in almost all situations, there are a few exceptions, no doubt, but in almost all situations, CI7800 is a plug-in for a CE7000A as far as the color is concerned. The inter-instrument agreement between a CE7000A, color i7000A, and a CI7800 is the same as the inter-instrument agreement between two 7800s or two 7000As. They are drop-in replacements for each other. There are some exceptions in some very unique situations, extreme fluorescent colors, for example, where we might see a bit more difference. But it was designed specifically, the CI7800, to match that requirement, because we realized that, honestly, the color i7000A was kind of the benchmark. It was the standard when it came to laboratory benchtop instruments, and the CI7800 is doing that as well. Okay.
Perfect. Good. Great, thanks, Tim. So there are a few more questions here. I'll export those and get them over to Tim. We're just about out of time for today, so we'll end here. Again, we will send out the recording to everyone so you can review it again at your convenience. That usually goes out the next day, so you should get that tomorrow. So I'd just like to say thanks once again, everyone, for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.